Well, I am thrilled to be here and to have a conversation with you. Jack said that it would be useful if I spent 10 or 15 minutes kind of talking about independent school governance. 370 schools serving 250,000 students, as he said, in 14 states and 4 countries. The independent school world, we make up a pretty big portion of that, but the independent schools in the United States have been around longer than any of the other schools. The oldest school that we serve at SAIS was founded in 1727. We have a couple of schools founded in the 1700s, a number of schools in the 1800s. So we have a lot of history in understanding ways that independent schools can work and how they work best. From a governance perspective, and since I only have 10 or 15 minutes, I won't tell you about all of those things, but from a governance perspective, I think it's important for families of schools to understand some of the differences and some of the uniquenesses of governance. By the way, we're the accrediting agency that comes in every 5 years and does an accreditation on the Walker School and all the other schools that are part of the association. So we have expectations that schools do things in certain ways, not just because someone arbitrarily plucked them out of the air at one time and said that this is what we should do, but it's because we've tried to look at best practice. We've looked at what the expectations are legally for our institutions, which are 501c3 or nonprofit organizations, and the kinds of things that go with that. And so what I'm about to tell you relates to not only accreditation expectations, but it also just relates to good practice. Is it a perfect way of doing things? Not necessarily, but nothing is perfect that I've found yet in the school world because you have so many people involved, and anytime that happens, things are not going to be great. But I am very confident that the independent school governance is is the best way to govern schools. And a number of my public school colleagues that I have talked to, and some of them very close here, but I won't use their name, agree that they wish their governance structure is a little bit more like independent schools. The most basic difference for you to understand about independent school governance is that the governing boards for independent schools are not representative boards or representative governance, they're fiduciaries. And what a fiduciary means, and I don't want to insult your intelligence because most of you understand this, but for those who might not, a fiduciary just simply means your sole focus is looking out for the organization or the trust of that which you've been put in charge of. So most often we think of governance in schools, and by the way, I've been on a public school board, an elected public school board many years ago. I understand very well the public school governance model, but we are not in the same model as the public schools in governance. Most of what you hear in the press, because 87% of the students in America attend public schools, and those are the ones that are funded by the government and therefore most readily scrutinized. For that, most of the press you get are about school boards that are elected school boards. But it's a completely different model than independent schools. As independent private schools, the boards are fiduciary boards. And this is an expectation of nonprofits, not just independent schools. So any nonprofit organization, the boards are most often called trustees as opposed to directors, which gives the implication they're directing the business day to day. But they are fiduciary boards that sole purpose is the interest of the school and its sustainability. So their primary role is to ensure that the school is sustainable on a long-term basis. It's not about just about today. It's about tomorrow. It's about next year. It's about 5 years down the road. And as I told you, our oldest school is 280 years old. We like to think the schools are meant to be here forever. So their primary role as a board is to make sure that the school is sustainable today but also sustainable for the long term. The board is also responsible for keeping the mission. In fact, one of our accreditation standards says that the board regularly reviews and revises the mission when appropriate. The mission of an independent school is owned by the school, and that in turn is owned by the legal officers of the corporation, which is the board. The fiduciaries of the board are the ones that oversee that mission. When we come in to do an accreditation visit for an independent school, come into Walker, we're not comparing you to anyone else in town. You're not being compared to a checklist that everyone else does, and you line it up there and say, okay, this is how Walker compares to Westminster or Lovett or Holy Innocents or Mount Heron or any of the other schools in town. You're only compared to your mission. Does a school know who they are? Do they communicate who they are? And are they who they say they are? Is the essence of that. So mission-driven schools that is owned by the schools is at the very heart and reason for the quality of independent schools that exist in the country. So we own our mission. It's not prescribed to us by an outside entity. And again, I am a product of public schools. I have a number of good colleagues in public schools. I want all kids to be served. So this contrasting that I'm doing is in no way criticizing, but the point is our public school colleagues have their mission given to them by the state, by the district, and then to some degree by the federal government, and often those don't mesh anyway, and that's part of the problem that they deal with. But an independent school it has its mission, it owns its mission, and the board is the keeper of that mission. They protect the mission by making sure that the school is appropriately insured and making sure that laws are being adhered to and the things are done that are in the right way. The board funds the mission. They fund the mission through primarily setting tuition. Most independent schools have somewhere around 90% of their operating revenue comes through tuition. So that is a major way of setting it. I don't know exactly what you are here. I'm sure you're going to find out sometime soon. So funding the mission through that, as well as deciding when the capital campaign is necessary to build or add to, and setting budgets and providing oversight for budgets. They're also responsible for promoting the mission. They need to be some of the biggest advocates for what is happening at the school and the community and in their social groups. So keeping the mission is primarily the role of the board as fiduciaries of the school. Their day-to-day duties simply involve hiring the best head of school they can hire as a CEO of the school to run the day-to-day operations. One of the reasons that trustees, and with parents here that might have experienced this in the past, one of the reasons that trustees will always defer you to go see administration or go see the teacher when you approach them with some kind of concern. And by the way, I've been a parent of 3 children. They've all been in schools. I understand how it is parenting, and there are times that you have concerns, whether it's a complaint about something or you're just concerned about something. But with our school boards and with trustees that are fiduciaries, they're not someone that you can approach and they will give them information and they'll bring it back to the board and represent you as a representative would in an election or an elected school board. What they're going to do is help you find solutions and say, have you talked to the head of school? Or have you talked to the teacher about that? Because as individual trustees, they have no authority whatsoever. Only does authority exist in the whole. Only when you have the whole board together is there any authority invested in governance at all. So if a trustee doesn't seem to be as interested in maybe a concern or complaint you have, or you think they're pushing you off, that's really the nature of the independent school board, is that they're looking out for the long-term sustainability of the school. They hire and evaluate the CEO, which is the head of school, and then look at the necessary reports on budgets and finance and everything else to provide appropriate financial oversight for the school to take care of their fiduciary role. So it looks a little different, and I understand that it isn't something that is always understood. I do more board trainings than any other single event that I do in my role at SAIS, and I've actually had 20-year trustees for independent schools when we start talking about that difference, saying it's the first time they'd ever really thought about it in that way. But that is a very important thing to understand, and it's not just independent schools. It's what we expect, but it's not just independent schools. It is an expectation of nonprofits, anyone that has a nonprofit status. And I won't bore you with the fact that Sarbanes-Oxley has become the de facto standard in the courts for nonprofits. And a couple of things that some of you go, oh, really? I'll talk to you outside if you want to know more about that. But they're fiduciaries, and they're here to serve you. Expect them to care very deeply about the school that your children are in. Expect them to promote this school. Expect them to provide the best program, the oversight and the best programming that is possible here. And when the board functions as it should, and I have every reason to believe it is here, they're looking out to make sure this school is here a long time down the road.